because of this new podcast, well, it's still fairly new. This is our 3rd episode, right? And we want to talk about things that we have relationships with. And we have relationships with everything.
People, places, and things.
Yes, everything. But we're going to kind of start talking with the obvious, the relationship between you and a significant other, and how to have those healthy moments. Not like we're experts or anything. We are just speaking from our experience. And
well, almost 10 years of experience. So I would probably say we have a little bit of experience.
Well, yeah, that's a lot, but not as much as some other people. So,
right.
But we've also kind of dived in, and there's some dynamics that we get to experience differently because we don't have children.
Right.
So
we had a child from the 13 to 14 through the foster care.
We fostered, yeah.
We did foster care for just over a year.
But that was really hard on our relationship.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of other underlying things that were going on that we spoke of in the past. So
yeah. But so I get it that like when you are in a relationship and you have children, that can create a whole nother dynamic that makes it a little bit more difficult to navigate sometimes. But the thing I've noticed is having boundaries and having the time to focus on you and your significant other impacts even the way you parent. Being able to teach your children healthy boundaries is going to help set them up for success in their future relationships and stuff. And so it's always important to focus on this and keep the priority of your relationship with your significant other. Because, man, that makes life, right? Like if you're sharing your life with somebody, you got to make sure you're working on it all the time. It's not just like a one and done. And being able to set boundaries is important and all that fun stuff. So that's why we're talking about that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jacob? Why do you want boundaries? Like, why is that important for you?
I think it's important, especially from a man's perspective, because boundaries can be crossed on both ends of a relationship. And so it's important to know what your partner's boundaries are, so that way you can mitigate the opportunities of that you don't accidentally cross them, or at least try your very best not to. But also, I think it's really good to have your own personal boundaries as well when it comes to like what you're going to do with like your free time. Having boundaries as far as like how people are going to treat you in the workplace, things like that. Like it's important to let people know, hey, you know, you can talk to me about this stuff or work stuff, but maybe some of your personal stuff is a little bit more personal than I would like.
Well, what's interesting is it all starts with how you set boundaries with yourself, right? Like,
yeah,
understanding how to identify when a boundary is needed is a big deal, and you need to know that on an individual level. And if you don't, then that's going to make your own life and your life in relationship to others more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but like understanding what boundaries you need and learning what works for you and what doesn't, that's really important. And some people, that's hard to deal with sometimes. So, and it's not admitting weakness. It's not admitting fault or anything like that, but it takes a minute to learn and understand those things about yourself sometimes, especially if you, depending the environment you grew up in, if boundaries were a part of it or if they weren't.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of an interesting dynamic because we're a product of our environment in a lot of ways. And so
in nurture versus nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So now boundaries, like what I had to learn, what was really hard for me to kind of grasp the concept. A boundary isn't like me telling you what you have to do. When I set a boundary, it's my responsibility to enforce it.
Right.
But when I set a boundary, the expectation is on me, not on somebody else.
Depending on the boundary.
Well, so for example, like if you're doing something that doesn't work for me, and if I express a boundary that requires you to change your behavior,
Mm-hmm.
if you do it, fantastic. But if you don't, then what am I going to do?
Yeah. Okay.
Do I
see what
remove
you
myself from, do you see what I'm saying? Because you
Yeah.
can't force somebody to have a specific behavior or to act a certain way. You just can't. You can't force anybody to do it. All you can do is express, hey, when you're in a relationship with me, this is a boundary I've set.
mean? Right.
But when you set that boundary, you have to have the expectation
that you're going to communicate to your partner, hey, when you do this thing, this is how it affects me, and I would like for you to either not do it or do something different.
Right. But
so it's your job to make that your partner aware every time that happens. So like, for instance, like we're working on the boundary of me not chewing on my fingers.
Oh my gosh.
Because it drives her crazy because she can hear it when I'm
But it's also
chewing on
not
my
healthy
fingers.
for you.
Exactly.
It's a bad habit, and it makes your nails look weird. But I can hear it because he's like, and it drives me insane. Like, there's certain sounds. But here's the thing. I've set that boundary, but I can't force him to stop. But if he's sitting there doing it on the couch, if he continues to do it, then he needs to not be offended if I choose to remove myself from the situation.
Right.
Because I've expressed that boundary. Right? And that's what it is. Like, I've expressed a boundary, I don't like it, and if you continue to do it, then the action is that I remove myself from the situation. Mm-hmm. And we don't spend time together when you're doing that.
Right, right.
But ultimately, the action to enforce that boundary is on me. Mm-hmm. Because it is my boundary.
Right, because certain sounds and noises like trigger something in your brain.
It just drives me insane.
Yeah.
And then I get all hyper-focused on that.
Yeah, and then you can't enjoy the TV show we're watching or the movie we're watching.
Or reading or
listening to TikToks or whatever the case may be.
There's like a few sounds that I have that just, when they happen, Jacob eating his fingers, I'm like, stop eating yourself. It's so weird. But like chewing, dogs licking themselves, the sounds of licking drive me insane. And there was another one, but they drive me absolutely insane. That's my thing. That's a me issue. And I can set that boundary with him, but if he chooses not to observe that boundary, then the expectation of action is on me. And right. I think that is sometimes really hard for people, or they don't where boundaries sometimes fell, I think, is that step, right? Mm-hmm. That the person who set the boundary must take the action. So when you set a boundary, be prepared to take action on it. Otherwise, it's not a boundary. It's a suggestion. Right.
There's definitely a difference between an expectation set for a boundary and...
Right. Jacob and I communicate very differently, and we work through our crap very differently.
Yeah.
So like, I'm the type of person that's like, I'm used to conflict because I just am. That's just what I experienced in my early years, and I'm not afraid of it.
Right.
It's almost like my defense mechanism. I'm working on it. I get it. Like, right. I'm also aware that like that type of communication, especially in the moment, does not work for everybody. And it definitely doesn't work for Jacob. Mm-hmm. Because how Jacob deals with conflict is he internalizes, goes quiet.
And so I need time and space to process it.
And it drives me absolutely insane because I'm like, let's just hash it out, get it over with, and like move on.
Yeah. But for me, it's like also like, not only is it I need to process it, but I also need to like decide, okay, how much am I involved in this? Like, how much of this is on me? And more often than not, there is part of it that is part of what I did or did not do or whatever, sins of commission and omission. And then figuring out where I am in all of that, and then going, you know what, you're right, I messed up. But there's also like, there's healthy boundaries like that, but there's also toxic boundaries. Like Like your partner saying, oh, you can't go and hang out with the girls, you know, and go to the bar or whatever.
I've never had that experience with you.
This is true. You have not. But I know that there have been other people who have experienced that. And like the only reason they don't want them to go is because they don't want them to go.
It's a control and power thing.
So it can turn into a control and power thing. You know, and that's where like toxic narcissism like comes into play. But if like your partner says, hey, I really don't want you to go to this bar because, you know, your friends that are girls also bring some of the boys that are your friends, and things get a little out of hand. And Toby, he likes to get a little frisky when he gets a couple of drinks in him. And so I feel very uncomfortable with you going out there and getting filled up while you're out at the bar. But now this is a very exaggerated extreme.
Yeah, and this is a hypothetical that we've never experienced.
Yeah.
Well, let's take it to one that we have experienced. For instance,
okay,
I've gone and done girls' trips or done work trips, and I may or may not have gone to a fun show, going up on stage with a handsome man.
The Mic of Magic in Las Vegas.
So
why are you turning red?
It was happening? Really funny because this is what's funny. Like, you know, I'm not like, I don't go. I just don't. Like, I got one man, I'm good to go. But I do like to go and have fun with the girls.
Right. And I think that's appropriate.
And like,
as long as you're staying safe.
Of course. Of course. But like, it was funny because we sent you the video of it. Like, I sent you the video of it, but he didn't look at it for a few months. And then like he was randomly looking at his thing. And he got so upset for a second. It was like, who's this dude singing to you? And I'm like, dude, that was when I went to Vegas and I was with the girls. And he's like, oh yeah. And it was cool. But he knew I was going. Right. He knew I was going.
I knew you're going to Las Vegas, and you're going with friends that I knew and I felt comfortable with you being around. So I didn't have any worries about what you guys did or where you guys went.
Because we have that trust. But the only reason why we have trust is because we've been able to set boundaries.
Right.
Would it be different, though, if I was skinny?
No. I think it would still be the same. I still would trust you. Of course, you'd have more men pining for you and slipping in your DMs and stuff, but
I still have dudes.
You do, and it's insane.
I'm a popular chick with the chubby chasers, apparently.
I guess so. I'm okay with it. I understand why.
Stop.
We didn't really explain boundaries, like what they are. They're just basically like rules that you've set in your relationship of like the do's and don'ts, like your bright lines, your do not pass go, do not collect $200 kind of stuff. Misconceptions and myths around boundaries. Do we talk about those?
Just because you say, it really hurts me when you do this, please don't do this anymore. If the person doesn't do it, the expectation of the action is on you, not on them. Because you can't force behavior. What are some other myths?
Well, you also can't, I mean, you can say things that hurt people's feelings, but you can't always control how people are going to feel about things that you say.
You have to make sure it's a boundary you're willing to follow through with and follow up with behavior,
mm-hmm.
right? So let's say we're going to set this boundary. It's a deal breaker, right? If Jacob spends, I don't know, $2,000 on podcast equipment on Amazon without telling me, like, that's a deal breaker. I'm just making one up.
Okay. I assumed that's what you were doing.
I'm just making one up.
I assume that's what you were doing. You're making one up.
I'm making one up. But if he doesn't course correct to honor that boundary, what am I prepared to do? Like, am I prepared to leave this relationship over spending? What is the action that I'm going to set in place in order to make sure that boundary is met?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and that's, I think, sometimes hard for people to look at, because sometimes they have to outweigh, like, well, this boundary is really important to me, and if the person I've chosen to spend my life with doesn't honor it, then what?
Right. And that might be the case. That might be the extreme where, you know, you really do have to take some time to sit down and really talk with your significant other and decide, okay, well, these are boundaries that I have chosen that I can't allow myself to cross and allow you to cross over. and we've tried, years to try to get through this, and we're still not getting through it. So, that might have to be the conversation, unfortunately. I mean, I think ideally, Reanne and myself would want people to do their very, very best to have really meaningful discussions and conversations with their partners, and really come down to know what each other's needs are, what their boundaries are, what you can cross, what you cannot cross, and then be able to move forward and move past through those things. And if they're not able to, then maybe it's not, maybe that relationship is not ideal, unfortunately.
So the first thing is to understand and know your boundaries, your personal boundaries, and what's important to you. And that takes some work. But the next thing is to learn and know how to communicate your boundaries. I have a specific example on this.
Okay, cool.
And it's about you and me. So.
Okay, let's do it.
We didn't pre-discuss this, so I hope it's okay.
Well, worst case scenario, we can edit it out because I'm editing it for the audio versions of these.
Okay. So, for example, Jacob and I were having a really rough year. Like, there was a lot going on. We had a rough couple of years. Ironically, year 7 and 8 were really hard for us. That's like the 7-year itch people talk about if you're in a long-term relationship. People have spoken about this a ton. There's like a legitimate thing. It's called the 7-year itch for married couples or long-term couples and stuff. Anyway, so we were going through our bit,
right?
But there was a time where Jacob wouldn't communicate with me what he wanted, and he kind of got apathetic. And when he did that, he was just like, "Whatever you want, babe. Whatever you want. I don't care. Whatever you want.
Whatever you think."
And then he would get irritated and frustrated when I'd be like, "Okay, fine." And we'd do the things that I want. And then he'd be all mad thinking he's not getting what he wants, but he never expressed it. So we had a real lack of communication happening around this time frame, which broke down our level of trust.
Right.
And I didn't trust Jacob to a certain degree because it felt like he was constantly checking out of the relationship. It's like I try and have a conversation with him, and rather than do the hard work and like talk about something that was a little difficult, he'd be like, "Yeah, checking out, done. I don't want to fight."
Yeah.
Because he would assume there was a fight when I'm just like trying to get to the bottom of something. And that's on how I was communicating as well. And so we could really, it was a tough time.
It was tough, but the constant communication and before we really understood, like, having check-ins and stuff like that, actually walking through it, figuring out what's going on. A lot of it was just, I was so stressed out, like at my job, like wondering if I have a job every year that I had zero brain space for a relationship, which really sucked.
Well, but also, like, for some reason we hadn't gone through something this hard to where we really learned how to rely on each other and draw strength from each other.
Right.
At this point, we were still kind of just
two separate people
operating individually within, and we hadn't really dived into how we could support each other in life. Right. And so, like, this was good, but kind of what that led to were a series of events where trust was broken down. And so even the smallest act of flirtation from Jacob was causing me to mistrust, and like I didn't trust him, and so it didn't feel good. It felt awkward.
And you felt like everything that was going on was you were doing everything, and I was just kind of like this absentee roommate that just kind of floated around. It was kind of not a part of it, but kind of was, sort of.
And then he'd come around wanting to be affectionate. And I was like, what the fuck? No, like, you're like, you check out and then you just come in and squeeze my boob when you're like feeling a little frisky. And I'm sorry, but that doesn't feel. So there was a physical boundary that I had to set because the lack of trust was there. And so We in one of our we had a couple knockout drag down fights, like, and not like physical, but like
drag out fights,
like where we sat down and we were like, it was intense. Like,
we had intense,
very intense conversations. There was no physical ever.
No.
But it was intense, and it's like to the point where you had to engage with me because I was like, dude, if you don't engage, I'm out. Like, it was that intense. But what came from that is we learned the hard way on how we needed to communicate. And I had to communicate a specific boundary in the moment, saying like, you're not showing up for me mentally and emotionally. So therefore, physically is hard for me. And I had to set a physical boundary.
Until you felt safe.
Until I felt safe again.
Yeah.
And that's okay. All boundaries don't have to be like forever and ever and ever. Like, it was just a boundary that I needed to set for that time frame until we could get to a better place at recognizing other boundaries. And so that's one thing I think is important to know, that you can set temporary boundaries until you feel safe, but like that's why conversations and learning communication within setting boundaries is so important. Understanding how the other person communicates is a big deal, because I was taking his lack of engagement personally.
Yeah.
When it really wasn't personal, it was him just trying to
process. And process for me takes time. And
for me, when, like, how I interpreted it, it was him checking out, not wanting to be a part of the relationship.
Right.
So I would push even more in fear of losing him.
Right.
Right. Or losing the relationship. And so it kind of created this perfect storm. But then once we kind of figured out and explicitly talked about how each of us communicate in conflict and out of conflict, and saying, when I do this, I need you not to internalize it and take it personally. Because that's what was happening, is we were taking each other's behavior personally.
Yeah.
And that's only because we hadn't established enough communication to say, hey, I'm dealing with something kind of hard right now. It's not about you. I need this. Mm-hmm. And expressing our needs.
Yeah. We
weren't expressing our needs with each other, or expressing our headspace or where we were at. And that created so much crap.
And also the confusion of, okay, are you just venting right now and just want to, be heard and acknowledged and like have your feelings validated? Or is this something that you're coming to me as a problem and an issue, and now this is something that I need to pay attention to try to fix?
Right.
And I think that's something that as men, it's really important to understand that mindset and then really communicate well with your partner. Is this something you want me to engage with in problem solving and fixing, or is this something that you're just looking for validation and understanding, in that time? And
sometimes I don't always know.
And so you got to default as just default to this is venting and until she says, yes, I need help with this to fix.
So, and this is another thing that's kind of hard because maybe you don't always know. For example, I'm an auditory processor.
Yes.
Meaning when I am processing intense emotions, I do it very outwardly, meaning I talk it out, I express it. If my words don't say it, my face will. Like, it's really like I wear everything on my sleeve. It's very easy to tell when I'm frustrated or angry or whatever.
Yeah.
And I have to talk it out.
Right.
I legit have to talk it out. And I say the words, does that make sense, a lot? Because I think as I'm talking it out, I'm trying to kind of get that feedback. Am I going absolutely cuckoo cuckoo in my own head, or are these thoughts valid?
Right.
Which of these thoughts are like crazy and stupid?
Not necessarily stupid. It's just you're trying to come up with the formulation of this is how I feel. This is how I'm thinking right now. And sometimes it doesn't make sense at the beginning.
Right. And then I have to talk it out.
So
yeah,
it's important to sit down and talk it out and try to figure it out. And then what I'm trying to do better at is that when my wife says, hey, this is how I'm thinking and feeling, I say, okay, this is what you've said. This is what I understand. Does that sound correct? And that usually helps us understand if that's correct or not that you're going through. So
it's literally Psych 101 communication type
skills.
It really is, but we forget to implement them when we're in the moment a lot of times.
Right.
But the other thing is you're not an auditory processor. You are a quiet processor. And so I like when he gets super quiet, I'm like, do I need to check in? What's going on? And I try and coax him a little bit, but he's like, never mind, I don't want to talk anymore. And I have to learn that I need to respect that. Like the other day, you had something go on at work you were really frustrated about. You expressed it.
I was just looking for validation and expressing my emotions at the time and feelings.
Yeah. And I went into fixing mode because I'm like, oh, dude, I know what you're talking about. I've been through this. I've learned this lesson. I've screwed it up. And I wanted to just impart all my wisdom on Jacob. But it would have...
Because you do have a lot of wisdom.
I do. I'm smart, y'all.
You are. You
freaking
are.
Smart. I've learned from all my mistakes. Not real, like, seriously. It's because I, like, screwed up so much that I've learned. Like, I get it. And anyway, so I was saying, well, maybe try this. And he's like, I just need to be done talking about it. I just needed to. And I was like, okay. It was really hard for me because I wanted to share a lot, but I left it alone. He set a boundary. And even though I thought what I knew was best, he didn't want me to fix it. So I wasn't going to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I maybe didn't observe the boundary at first because you asked twice.
No, I had to tell you 2 or 3 times, but that's okay. And I think something that's really important, especially with relationships, is we need to up our frequency of our relationship check-ins. And I think that's really important to have either weekly or bi-weekly, at the very least. Because I think when you start getting to the point where you're moving out to like once a month or once every 3 months, then you're not really on the same page. And so because we are doing that more frequently, and then we are also expressing ourselves much better when we're in those situations where, hey, I just need, my feelings validated at this point. But it's really, really important to have that frequency of the check-ins. And so if you're not asking your partner, things like, how is your mental health? How is our relationship going? How is the division of work in our household? If these things aren't talked about, then it's going to become an issue later on.
Right.
And I think the more that we're doing that, we're also getting better of knowing whether we're looking to have our frustrations expressed, like I just need to express my emotions, versus I need you to help me fix this issue.
Well, and I think what we've learned is like the first 6 years of our marriage, we didn't really do check-ins.
We really didn't, and that was
In
tough.
fact, we allowed things to get so intense
that they became big issues later on.
Yeah, before we would address them, that like it did become a fight, and so therefore anytime we engaged, it became a fight on some level. I was frustrated because you would just like lay down and let me do stuff. Like, for example, the car, right? We got a car. I wanted it. I worked hard for it. I wanted this car. Mm-hmm. And then you were like, no, no, no. And I was like, no, I want this car. And then you didn't say no. You were just, well, I don't know.
No, I was apprehensive. I was just like, we can't really afford this right now. And I don't see where... Go ahead.
Yeah, but at the same time, you weren't really involved with I knew what we could afford a little bit better because I was handling the finances.
Right.
You weren't really engaged with the finances because we hadn't really set stuff up, and I don't know. There was a lot of stuff going on. But this is one thing that so we got the car, and like when things got tight, that experience of me getting the car that I had worked hard for kept coming up. Because he didn't effectively express to me what he wanted, and he got apathetic.
Yeah.
And he's like, whatever you want, whatever you want. And I was like, fine, whatever I want. I'll do it. Fine. You know what I mean? And,
yeah.
And then it
just
became a
got worse.
sore spot.
Yeah.
So, and then we found ourselves communicating these pretty, like, they were a big deal for us, but they were always being communicated in times of contention or frustration and stuff because it just kept building.
Right.
And so we learned that we had to do check-ins.
Yeah.
And these check-ins had to happen outside of intense emotion. They had to happen outside of an argument and stuff. Like, we had to be intentional with them.
Yeah.
And the reason is because when you're able to communicate your needs, your boundaries, and all that stuff outside of intense emotion, you're able to, one, communicate it more clearly because you're not overwhelmed with cortisol and all that crap that comes when you're in a stressed out mood.
Right.
And you're able to receive information better because you're not coming from a defensive place.
Right.
Like, we started listening to the To Be Better podcast.
I started listening to the To Be Better podcast.
You started listening. And then he introduced me to it. And we listened to it and stuff. But they had this check-in list that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started doing it. And we modified it so it fit us a little bit.
And we're still modifying it. So we make sure that we're getting through everything.
But what's been really helpful is as we're doing it periodically, like, we can draw on specific examples of where maybe a boundary was crossed or a certain type of communication happened a certain way that was frustrating. Most recent, I had a birthday recently.
Anger and frustration.
Yeah. I had a birthday recently, and it pulled up a lot of emotion, as birthdays do sometimes. And I was realizing a few things or had some really stupid, intrusive thoughts come in, and they were beating me up a lot.
Yeah.
They were beating me up a lot.
You were going through it. you was going through it, and I felt so bad because there was nothing I could do to make it better.
But at the same time, I knew that, like, if I didn't communicate with Jacob what was going on in my brain, the story he would tell himself based off of our past experience would probably create a wedge. And it would...
Assumptions. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, right? Like, because...
Yeah.
If you don't have the information, like, we make up stories in our head all the time. It's like, oh, well, he just, like, walked away. I bet he doesn't even care, blah, blah, blah. We start making all these assumptions and boundaries, and we do that in all relationships we have. We do it with our spouses, our kids, our coworkers. Like, when I tell you how many stories I've told myself and I've heard other people say about coworkers and assumptions just based off of minute reactions, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so stupid. I need to not do that.
Right.
I need to recognize what's happening, but I need to not make the assumption. And if I need clarity, get the clarity, or don't let that crap bug you. Like, move on.
Right.
And sometimes that's harder when you're with a significant other. It's easier at work or whatever, but I've learned a lot of different things over the last few years.
Right.
But I realized I had to tell Jacob, and his first instinct, because I was in my feels, I was in the emotions, I was in my feels, and I just needed to get it out, because if I left it in my head, it wasn't going to serve me very well at all.
Right.
So I was like, okay, Jacob. And mainly because when I was frustrated at something that happened and that triggered the whole event, blah, blah, blah. And it was something that we agreed to do, but it didn't end up happening because there was a change of plans and I was bugged. And then that triggered everything else.
We slept in, and then...
Yeah.
It's like, anyway, we can still go, and then we had an argument about it. It was... Yeah,
well, I was frustrated. I was in my feels, right?
Yeah.
It triggered feels, and I wasn't communicating very well.
Right.
I was being a little bit of a passive-aggressive, like, whatever, I guess we're just going to sleep all day on my birthday. That sucks, blah, blah, blah. I was being a little bit of a brat. It triggered a lot. And then I started expressing what my nasty little intrusive thoughts were. And I was in my feels, so I wasn't communicating the most effectively. And he immediately went on the defense.
Yep, I did.
And I was like, And like it turned into an argument. And I had to stop and I had to be like, you know what? I wasn't trying to argue with you. I legit am just trying to express these thoughts that are not serving me and are making me miserable, and I'm struggling right now. It has nothing to do with you.
Right.
This is just what's going on, and it really sucks right now.
Right.
And I did express, like, I don't want things. I just want memories. I want to create memories on my birthday. I don't want stuff. I want memories. And like he got defensive and everything. And after I said, I don't want to argue. I'm just trying to express what's going on. So I don't go deeper. Right. So I don't allow these intrusive thoughts to go deeper from where they're at.
Yeah.
Because it was intense, and it was stupid intense.
Yeah.
Stupid intense. But some of my thoughts and stuff are valid.
Absolutely.
But
how you feel is how you feel.
Yeah.
Like, it's valid. It might not be correct objectively, but in the moment, yeah, absolutely.
So anyway,
but
you course corrected, and this was awesome. And it was because of our check-ins that he was like, I'm here. Like, he realized he was making it about him.
Yeah.
In the moment. And he didn't need to. He realized, oh, I need to show up for her and be a sounding board for her right now emotionally. She's not picking on me to pick on me. She just needs this right now.
And sorry, go ahead.
And
finish your thought.
The only reason why that I expressed to him, like in a previous check-in, that like sometimes I just need to speak it out and I need somebody to listen.
Right.
And I even tried to preface, like, before I started having a conversation, I'm like, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a neurotic beast. A completely self-absorbed neurotic beast, but this is my birthday right now, and this is like what's happening, and I need to get it out. So please don't take offense. And that probably even put you on guard. You said
that is the thing that I wanted to actually make a point on, because in the past, when we would start these heated discussions that inevitably became arguments, or we'd be upset at each other, it was, hey, I don't want you to be upset, or hey, I don't want you to get defensive, but here's a bunch of stuff that you should be defensive about. So I took that as, okay, we're going to war here. So I'm going to go ahead and put up my walls. I'm going to put my defenses, and we're going to war.
Well,
so I immediately was defensive about it. I was saying, okay, well, these are the reasons why we slept in. This is what happened the day previously, that we made decisions to go and help, a friend and all these things. And yeah, it was really funny because you just stopped me and said, Jacob, I'm not looking to have an argument about this. I just need you to hear how I feel.
Well, and I was trying to explain to you how these certain things that happened triggered these thoughts and emotions, and why I was in my feels. Yes.
Yeah, missing your dad and all these other things.
Yeah. So like and it's just like, here's the events that happened that triggered all of this. And it was some things that you had done.
Right.
But I wasn't trying to blame. I was just trying to say, like, this triggered this.
Yeah.
And this is why. And I need to talk to somebody so I don't go completely off the rails.
Right. So until you expressed it, and then I asked the question, okay, so you just need to express your emotions at this point. You're just looking for, affirmation of, yes, I'm struggling right now. Okay, got it. Go ahead. And I basically completely changed, and I went into, I'm ready to be the sounding board. I'm ready to be the sponge. I'm ready to be the person that you can share all your deepest, darkest emotions and feelings right now. And I'm here to comfort you. Yeah. And that's when it changed.
Totally. And the thing is because in the past he would get defensive anytime I was trying to work through some intense emotions. And I had a lot of things over the last couple of years that happened that were very traumatizing.
Yeah.
In work and in just in life in general.
Yeah.
And that weighed on our marriage because I was coming to him to try and work some of this stuff out, and it just made him mad because it made him feel inadequate or whatever. Like, it made him feel a certain way, but I didn't know because of XYZ. Like, we've worked on this, but the only reason why we can do this is because we do the check-in. So fast forward, my birthday, right? Having all these fills and everything. But then literally the next day we decided to do a check-in.
Yep.
No, it was the next weekend.
No, it was the next weekend. Yeah.
It was the next weekend. So the next weekend we did a check-in. And it was good because like I had processed some of my intense emotions and my stupid intrusive thoughts. And then we did a check-in. But the great thing about this was through this check-in, because we were doing it fairly frequently, I could say, okay, so remember when we had this conversation and this happened? And when you did this helped me build trust. So even though we had an argument, like I was able to give him a specific instance of where his behavior helped, where he was like, oh, you're right, we're not in an argument. I need to show up differently. Yeah. And even though like it was hard at first, he course corrected and stuff. And so I said, that's why I'm feeling like I can trust you, because you're being aware enough in the moment and that's building trust. So I'm able to give specific examples as it happened frequently or recently. And so when you do these check-ins on a regular basis, you can reference experiences and stuff or specifics to give that specific feedback. And you're doing it in an environment where you're not like overwhelmed by intense emotion. You're setting intentionally that like we're communicating honestly and openly, and we're not going to show up defensively, but we're open to feedback. And that's kind of the agreement. When we do these check-ins, we have to be 100% honest and open to feedback. And we have to take it from an objective standpoint and not get defensive. Mm-hmm. Right? Like we come to it with that mindset.
Right.
Because when we're doing the check-in, we're both showing up to become better.
Right.
And to be better for each other and for ourselves. And it has helped so much.
These weekly check-ins are definitely a game changer for us. I mean,
and we haven't even done them weekly.
No, we haven't.
I mean, we've done them kind of light.
We kind of started doing them actually when we started getting better at our relationship. And we just didn't know what they were called. And we just didn't know how we would go about doing it until we got to the point where we figured out, oh, okay, these are the questions we need to ask. These are the things we need to touch upon.
Yep.
And now it's just they're getting better and better. They're getting shorter and shorter. And we're able to move on with our lives after we talk about it. So it's really good.
So like the first one we did, it was hours. And some people who have done these, they go for days.
Yeah.
Because there's some stuff that needs to be taken care of, like with one specific question, right?
Yeah, for a lot of our stuff, it was past stuff that I was still holding on to.
But these check-ins, so I think is what we're going to do is we'll put a link to a list of the questions that we go through.
Yeah, we'll probably finalize that probably at the end of the month.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been working on it.
So this is questions you can sit down and go through with your spouse. And it's similar. I mean, we do want to give credit to the To Be Better podcast because they have
inspired us to make
they've
our
inspired
own.
us, right, to
For
make
sure.
our own.
Yeah.
And so we're grateful to them, and we want to make sure we give credit where credit is due. When we talk about boundaries, there's a lot of areas that you can set boundaries in. And the ones that we have found to be important are physical. Physical and sexual are kind of the same.
Yeah.
Kind of, but not really.
No, because physical touch could just be like holding too long on a hug. I mean, it could be as simple
like
as that for people who just...
how you physically engage with me in public versus in the bedroom.
Or in private, yeah.
In private. So there's differences.
That is true. There's definitely a different awareness of how, because one of my love languages is touch, very much so.
And me, I'm like, oh, yeah. I only allow myself to be touched by very specific people. Like I do not do physical touch very much.
You don't. But it's important to have those boundaries of, okay, what is okay behind closed doors, at home, in your home versus how you're going to react with each other and what those boundaries are in public.
Yeah.
I mean, you might get a quick booty tap before we head in, but
it's not like you're
or a hug and a
groping
kiss.
me. You're not groping me in public and stuff.
That was a boundary. I think that was set by both of us, and I think we just kind of naturally grew into it. Honestly, we're not really excited about people with like extensive PDA in public, and so we do our best to kind of be that example of we don't do a ton of PDA in public. Like we'll kiss each other, we'll hug each other, but we're not. I don't know.
I feel like for some people we might have too much PDA.
Well, this is true, but I'm just saying in general, I think we've toned down a lot of the displays of affection.
Well, we're not as young and in love as we used to be. I'm just kidding.
I disagree with that.
We are
behind closed doors.
We are in love with each other much more than we used to be.
I completely agree.
But we're not as young as we used to be.
This is true.
And I think with the level of comfort that we have with each other, the need for the PDA is not as necessary.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So physical and sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries, family boundaries.
Ooh, we should touch upon that one. That one's a good one that we've recently in the last year talked about. Oh, is that okay? Is that my cue to go into it? Okay.
Well, no. Okay. Well, let's talk about social media boundaries. That's a big one. And I don't think people realize, but like social media plays a huge facet. And I mean, just think of how much we're like got phones and technology in our face and stuff. And so that's a big deal. I think for a lot of people that, we've had to kind of develop like some dude sliding into my DMs and like,
yeah,
I showed Jacob and he's like,
that was quite the conversation. I was just like, that's different. Yeah, what was he trying to get you to do?
Oh, dude, like
to just degrade him for like a couple $100 a month or something like that, and all you had to do was like degrade him and tell him he's a piece of crap.
Yeah, like I'll pay you like X amount of dollars to do this, and I was just like,
that was,
babe, I could make some extra spending money for the podcast, and he's like, I'm not comfortable with that. Of course, I'm not gonna do it, but
coming from another dude, like I get it. People have like their own personal like things that get them excited about women and, turns them on and stuff like that. I just don't get it. Like having another person, like it's pretty much a stranger, like paying them monthly to tell you how a bad person you are and you're terrible at life. And,
I don't know. People have weird fetishes.
And I get that. And, each to their own. I mean, I'm not judging. I'm just saying for me and myself, that seems very sad to me.
But that wasn't necessarily.
I would rather my wife saying I am the best thing that's ever happened to her. I am the best husband ever, versus I'm a piece of crap on a stick, and it'd be better for you to float off of a waterfall or something like that. I don't know. That's probably really bad examples of that. But
that's not the point we were making.
But the point that we were making was the boundary. And when it comes to strangers and talking to strangers and getting paid to do strange things for them, that just wasn't something that I felt very comfortable with, just because, I mean, it could become unsafe at some point. I mean, it's really easy for people now to figure out where you're at, even if you didn't give them the county or the city you lived in.
Even though we've done that.
Yeah, don't come to our house, guys. Like,
they don't know where our address is. Anyway,
I know, if you figure it out, like, please don't.
So there's definite boundaries we got to set around social media and stuff, and I think it's important for couples to do that, because I'm seeing that be a bigger issue nowadays. And then, especially
like how much you're willing to reveal yourself.
Yeah.
As far as like, provocative photos and videos,
or even like there's there's physical infidelity, but then there's also like emotional or spiritual, like there's other types of infidelity that can happen in a marriage. And I feel like social media plays a big role in that.
Like, help me understand what you mean by.
So basically, somebody who you go to for emotional support other than your significant other. Which can be necessary, but
it depends. Like, it can become a very fine line.
Exactly.
And you could possibly pass over a boundary very easily when you're going to somebody else instead of your significant other to resolve issues. I think once you get to the point where, like, let's say somebody slid into my DMs and we struck up a conversation, and it's a woman. Let's say they're single with 2 children, and we talk back and forth, and we realize we're very socially compatible and emotionally compatible, and we're having issues, and I go to her and start talking to her on DMs. Pretty soon we're chatting on Facebook, or we're exchanging numbers, and we're texting and calling each other. I think that would really get to the point where that could become something more than just you're looking for some feedback.
Yeah.
And that can be a very fine line, and people do need to be careful about that kind of stuff, because some men will play the long game. They really will. They will play the long game until that husband drops the ball and they swoop in, and it happens. It really does.
Matt Rife has like a whole bit on this, and it made me laugh so hard. Yeah. So check out Matt Rife and like
Comedy Daddy.
Oh,
is he the new Comedy Daddy?
No, I don't know. Anyway, it was really
he's
funny.
He's a very handsome man.
I agree. He's not hard to look at for sure, but and then financial boundaries. So this is a big deal, and I think this comes up in couples. For couples or with significant others or whatever, if you're married or you share finances, this is really, 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 really important. And it's one that can be misconstrued because people's relationship with money comes into play with this. And so you're not only having to navigate your own personal relationship, but you're also navigating each person's relationship with money and value and how they show up. Like, it's weird. You guys, we're going to do a whole segment on like relationship with money. I'm going to bring in some people who are super awesome to talk about that. But
I'm really excited about that.
I know.
That'll be dope.
So but relationship with money impacts so many different areas of your life. So many different areas. But it's important to understand where you're at with money and to set boundaries within your personal relationship, especially if you share finances, so that things can't be misconstrued. Because that was a rough one for us because of Jacob's job. He was out on the road a lot and everything. And he ended up spending money on fast food because of the type of work he was doing. And it's like, that if you're spending money on fast food, it's a lot. And it can add up a lot.
It accumulates very fast.
And when, at the time, we were supporting 2 different households 6 months out of the year, because I was staying in Utah and he was going out for the summer with his job. And so supporting 2 different households. And then one is spending so much money on food. It was like so frustrating for me because I'm like, you're literally shitting it down the toilet. Like, it's like, it's money you can't get back. You're eating like it was. And so that took a lot of work, and we kind of got on the same page, and it's still a lot of work that we need to address in certain areas, but like we've definitely gotten better at it. And I think we've worked on our personal relationship with money a lot too. And
we also know the limit to where, we need to talk to each other about it.
Well, because we've set that boundary, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to like hound you if you go out to eat once or twice a week and you keep it under a certain thing. But like when it starts getting excessive, it's like we need to check in, and you need to not be upset about that or take it personally.
Right.
Likewise with me. And when I say we need to watch this, I mean we, including me, do this. I need to be better at this too. So let's help each other be better.
Right.
Right. But because of our relationship with money and food.
Yeah. Still struggling with that relationship.
Yeah. So it's okay. But that's one thing when you realize how your relationships with other things and other facets of your life can impact your significant relationships, of like your relationships with significant others. That's a big deal. So that's why these are kind of the areas that we focus on when we're setting boundaries or looking into boundaries. Some of the other things you might want to look at, especially if you have kids, is you've got to figure out the boundaries on how you parent and set boundaries with parenting, right?
Oh,
like
that was such a difficult thing with a foster kid.
yeah.
Trying to figure out like what our boundaries are, trying to figure out what was acceptable, what is not acceptable, trying to figure out where we cross paths and we kind of do better on one thing or another, or where do we need to have a focused front on, but also we needed to make sure that we didn't really focus on, which was we needed to also make sure that we were taking care of each other, not only the kid.
Oh yeah.
Because it kind of went the complete polar opposite, where we went from focusing and caring and working on a relationship together versus when we went straight into parent mode, and now we're parenting a teenager and
right, like really, a teenager is like the best part to like jump in and start parenting, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, but the other thing we learned, like there were still a lot of holes where we hadn't figured stuff out
right
in our relationship. So it was a learning experience for us in a lot of ways. But parenting, like, it's hard. And it's hard to figure this stuff out for yourself while raising tiny humans.
Yeah.
And trying to get them to grow up with some sense of value and stuff in themselves. Like, parenting is not easy, especially to raise tiny humans who don't become complete a-holes.
Yeah.
It takes work.
And they might grow up to be, terrible human beings.
Despite your best efforts.
Despite your best efforts. Yeah.
But is what I'm saying is like, that's a whole nother dynamic that we can't really speak to a whole lot because our experience with that is like
just
this
over
big.
a year. Yeah.
And I'm sure it's different, like when you have babies, and different phases require different stuff. So I think it would be great if we could do like a parenting podcast and have some people who are parents and talk about how they
that would be good.
They do that with kids.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Because that's hard. So
do you want to talk about the time where we had to set the boundary for family?
Yeah, that's I don't know, because I feel like
do you want to move on from that?
No, we can talk about it, because I feel like that's a really important, especially for couples and newlyweds. It's important to kind of understand those boundaries and to be clear on those and understand those and kind of get that set up. Because when two people get married, they were raised totally differently, usually. Yeah. Maybe not. I don't know.
We were raised completely differently. You were a single kid.
I'm an only child.
Only child. Yeah, that sounds better. You were an only child. I had a younger brother and a younger sister who are now moved on with their lives. They got kids. They're married. You know, they got lives going on right now.
You were raised by a single mom. A portion of
of my life. Yeah.
You had a stepfather who wasn't like the best influence for you, and
some issues. Yeah. Had a lot of emotional trauma out of all of that. But divorced when I was younger, thinking it was my fault, and working through all that stuff. Yeah. It's
but how I show up for family functions is different than how like your family, like, so it was really interesting to navigate and try and understand how things happen.
Well, I think something that's really important to think of is that family is a choice. Like, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, family is just, you're part of the blood, you're related by blood, and so therefore you're supposed to be there for each other. And I think very differently about that, just because I'm only going to have good people in my life if they're good people. And so if people aren't good people, I'm going to make sure they exit my life or I move away out of their lives, and look elsewhere for better connection, a better support system in family. And I think family is the people that you choose, rather than just because you're blood related, you have to save them. You have to take care of them. You have to do that. And I think that especially when it comes to toxic relationships with other people, it's important to identify those boundaries that need to be set. And you need to say, look, if you're going to act this way, this is something I cannot deal with. This is not something that I can continue to support. And so it's important for you to know to take those boundaries and make sure that they're set. And if they're crossed, and if they're crossed too many times, unfortunately, it's time to let them go. And that's it's really sad when that happens. But I think it's important to have that. And even with the people that you do love and care about and you have a certain relationship with, sometimes other people don't understand that relationship, or because they were raised differently, it's difficult for them to be in an environment with a lot of people, especially when it comes to family. And so
okay, so to speak to that, family holidays, like, there are times, because I grew up
go to your place, buddy.
Because I grew up as an only child.
Go to your place.
Overstimulation around the holidays is a big, like,
attaboy.
I realize that is very hard for me to handle. I don't operate at my best. Like,
we're overstimulated.
When I'm overstimulated, holidays also, and this is something, of course, I need to work on. I get it, but they hold a lot of emotions for me for various reasons. I've lost a lot of loved ones around the holidays.
Same.
Right? So, holidays feel a different way for me than for other people because of my experience. And so sometimes it's not easy to communicate that I'm in my feels. Like, birthdays and holidays just kind of put me in my feels. I get to work through that. That's my issue. But that's when I communicate with Jacob, like, hey, if I say this word, that means I'm overstimulated. It's nothing to do with other people. I just need to take a break.
Yeah.
And I had to communicate that with you, being like, I don't want people to think that I'm being mean or ornery. It's just like, it's hard for me.
And I even used it too. I was just like, all right, safe word. Let's go and go for a walk or whatever. Yeah. It's important to have that.
Yeah.
It's important to have that.
And I love our family, all of our family. I love them deeply. 100%. It's not a question of love. It's a question of me managing myself in the environment.
Right.
And sometimes it's harder than others. I'm working on it, so it's not. But the older I get, the more acute some of these things become.
Right, right.
You know what I mean? Because I'm more aware of them. The good news is we're in this life to figure that stuff out and to become better and to overcome these things. But it's important that family members understand that, and that you're close. Like, had to figure it out myself enough to a point where I could articulate to Jacob what was going on, so he didn't assume I was just being a rampant bitch at his family get-togethers. Because I wasn't trying to be. No. Right?
But when you get overwhelmed and overstimulated, it comes out that way.
Like I said, I don't wear. I don't do it on purpose. I don't do it on purpose, but I
know you well enough that that's not your intention. That's not what. That's really not what was going on. It was all about what was going on in your head, what's going on in your heart. But yeah. But it's important to recognize that and be like, oh, okay, it's time to.
And I kind of rely on him to express that to his family when necessary, right? Uh-huh. Like, if I'm going through my feels, I kind of need Jacob to run interference sometimes so that they don't feel like I'm hating them. Right. Or whatever. But, like, sometimes he has to express, like, she's just got some stuff going on. Just give her a minute or whatever. Yeah. Right? Like, I've asked you to do that for me a couple times. Yeah. And it's not because I don't like people. It's just sometimes I don't like being around a lot of people when I'm in a certain
headspace. Yeah. Heart space.
I think, like, we've covered a lot of information and given some good stuff, but, like, boundaries are important. The role of communication is essential when figuring out boundaries and setting boundaries. Mm-hmm. And then understanding where it's important to have healthy boundaries. And we can dive into this a little bit more, but I'd love feedback. I'd love to know, like, what boundaries if anybody wants to give us feedback, like, what are some important boundaries that you have found to be helpful for you? Right? Like, some people might value physical boundaries more than they do social media boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, did we miss something, or do the boundaries really...
or maybe it might be like a cultural boundary, or even like a spirit, like a religious boundary, you know, where in some religions they have specific times and ways that you perform certain rituals, like prayers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that could be a boundary that you need to set and be like, hey, just so you know, during these times of the day, I need to go off and do my thing.
Right.
You know,
right.
That's something we don't think about. And especially if you are in a high demanding religion, there's also, you know, you need to decide your boundaries of how much time and effort you're going to be putting into the said demanding religion. Versus,
yeah,
you know,
because there are some religions that require more than others.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like it's a boundary that needs to be set and be like, okay, well, these days, these are family days, or this weekend is our weekend. Like, it's important to set those. And I think a lot of times when we get to the point where we believe very strongly in something, you know, we allow people to draw us in and put more time and effort than we really need to, and we're taking that time away from our family and our friends. And I think that's something that's, you know, you need to think about.
We're super excited to get this going again, and we're excited to see you on the next podcast. And from our house to yours, have a good night.
Yeah, don't forget to like and follow and share with all your family and friends, and we will catch you on the next one.